A man adopts a strange German shepherd that was left limping behind his garage. Its back twisted, body soft, like it had no bones at all. But the moment he takes the dog to the vet, she freezes and locks down the entire office. Not because the dog is dangerous, but because she's seen something like this before, in a classified government file. Why was this dog kept alive? And what secret was it never supposed to carry? This is a story of hidden experiments, quiet redemption, and a broken man who finds purpose in the most unlikely companion. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning air hung heavy with the aftermath of rain, carrying the sharp scent of wet asphalt and fallen leaves. Caleb stood at his garage door, his lower back screaming its usual protest as he lifted the metal shutters. The rusty hinges groaned, a sound he'd gotten used to over the past 5 years since trading his engineering career for this quiet life, fixing cars in a town most people only pass through. Water dripped steadily from the shop's worn awning, creating small rivers that snaked across the cracked concrete. Caleb's weathered hands moved automatically through his morning routine, clicking on the fluorescent lights, checking the appointment book he knew would be empty, and fighting with the ancient coffee maker that somehow still worked despite its constant complaints. The dull ache in his back matched his mood, a constant reminder of why he'd ended up here, away from the life he'd built in the city. Away from everything, really. The silence of the empty street felt familiar, almost comfortable now. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to his carefully ordered morning. A whine, barely audible over the patter of leftover raindrops. Caleb paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips, and listened. There it was again, coming from behind the building. His boots splashed through puddles as he made his way around to the dumpster. The whine grew clearer, accompanied by a wet, rasping sound that made something in his chest tighten. As he rounded the corner, he stopped short. A German shepherd lay crumpled in the mud, its fur matted and dark with rain. The dog's body was twisted at an angle that made Caleb's own back twinge in sympathy. Its hind legs sprawled uselessly in the muck, while the front paws scrabbled weakly at the wet ground. "Hey there," Caleb said softly, crouching down despite his protesting spine. The dog's eyes locked onto his, deep brown and startlingly alert despite its condition. It didn't growl or try to move away, just watched him with an intensity that made him feel strangely exposed. "Okay," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. "Okay, let's figure this out." He shrugged off his jacket, ignoring the cold morning air that immediately bit through his thin shirt. With careful movements, he spread the jacket on the ground beside the dog. The animal was heavy, but Caleb managed to ease it onto the makeshift stretcher. Every time he had to shift the dog's twisted body, those brown eyes stayed fixed on his face. But not a sound escaped, except for shallow, panting breaths. Getting the dog into his truck was a challenge that left him sweating and trembling, his back screaming in protest. The old Ford suspension creaked as he climbed into the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, he could see the dog lying still on his jacket, those eyes still watching. The streets were empty as he drove, puddles splashing under his tires. The vet clinic was on the other side of town. Not that that meant much in a place this small. The Brooks Veterinary Services sign came into view, its blue paint faded but still readable. Dr. Lena Brooks was already opening the door as he pulled up, probably having heard his truck's distinctive rumble. She was a tall woman with prematurely graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face carrying the kind of careful neutrality that came from years of delivering both good and bad news. "Caleb," she said, nodding in greeting, "you don't have any pets." "Found this one behind my shop," he replied, gesturing to the truck's back seat. Lena's expression shifted slightly as she peered in the window, becoming more focused, more professional. "Let's get him inside." Together, they managed to carry the dog into the clinic. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the examination room as they laid the animal on the metal table. Lena's hands moved with practiced efficiency, running along the dog's body, checking vital signs. When she reached the twisted spine, her movements slowed, became more deliberate. Caleb watched her face, saw the moment when something changed. Her professional mask slipped for just a second, showing something that looked almost like fear before smoothing over again. Without a word, she walked to the front of the clinic. The lock clicked, and the blinds rattled as she drew them closed. The open sign flipped to closed, with a soft plastic snap. When she returned, her face was set in hard lines. "You need to leave now," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "Forget this dog, for both your sakes." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "What's wrong with him?" "Mr. Walker," she said, using his surname for the first time in the years he'd known her. "I'm telling you to walk away. Go home. Forget you found him." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended, surprising even himself. The dog's eyes were still on him, steady and knowing. "I want answers." Lena's hands clenched on the edge of the examination table. "You don't know what this is?" "Then tell me." She shook her head, stepping back from the table. "I can't help you. Take him and go." Caleb looked at the dog, at those intelligent eyes that hadn't left his face since he'd found it. His back ached, reminding him why he'd chosen solitude, why he'd walked away from complications and connections. But something about those eyes, about the trust in them, made him reach for the blanket Lena had left folded on a nearby chair. With careful movements, he wrapped the dog in the soft fabric, lifting it despite the protest of his scarred muscles. The animal relaxed slightly in his arms, its wet fur soaking through to his shirt. "Your choice," Lena said quietly as he walked past her. "But remember, I warned you." Caleb didn't respond. He carried the dog back to his truck, settled it as comfortably as he could in the back seat, and climbed behind the wheel. In the rearview mirror, those brown eyes watched him, steady and unblinking, as he pulled away from the clinic and into the gray morning. Back in his garage, Caleb cleared a space near his workbench, sweeping aside metal shavings and carefully laying down a blue tarp. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. With gentle movements that belied his large, calloused hands, he lowered the German Shepherd onto the makeshift bed. The dog's fur was still damp, and occasional tremors ran through its twisted frame. Caleb's mind shifted in problem-solving mode, the same way it did when faced with a particularly challenging repair job. He grabbed a heat lamp he used for paint drying and adjusted it on its stand, positioning it to warm the animal without overwhelming it. "First things first," he muttered, more to fill the silence than anything else. The dog's eyes followed him as he gathered his first aid supplies, antiseptic, gauze, and clean rags he kept for oil spills. The wounds weren't deep, mostly scrapes and mud-caked patches, where the dog had dragged itself across rough ground. As Caleb cleaned each abrasion with careful strokes, he studied the animal's unusual anatomy. The spine dipped and curved in ways that defied natural structure, yet the dog remained calm under his touch, only occasionally twitching when he hit a sensitive spot. "Easy there," he said softly, dabbing antiseptic on a particularly nasty scrape. "Almost done." The German Shepherd suddenly shifted, front legs pushing against the tarp in an attempt to sit up. Caleb watched as the dog's muscles strained, its determination evident in every movement. But without proper support from its spine, the effort was futile. The dog's back half remained limp, and after a moment of struggle, It collapsed back onto the tarp, panting from the exertion. Caleb sat back on his heels, observing the frustrated animal. His hands absently twisted the cap back onto the antiseptic bottle as he considered what he was seeing. 20 years of engineering experience kicked in, his mind automatically analyzing the structural problem before him. "You've got no structure, huh?" he said, reaching out to stroke the dog's head. The fur was softer than he expected, and the animal leaned into his touch. "Like a car without a frame, or ... He glanced at the motorcycle parts scattered across his workbench, and a small smile tugged at his mouth. "Like an axle that's given out." The dog's ears perked slightly at his voice, and Caleb found himself continuing. "That's what you need, an axle. Something to hold you together." He scratched behind the dog's ears, earning a slight tail wag. "Might as well call you that. Axle. Every busted machine deserves one, right?" The newly named Axel responded with a soft woof, and Caleb felt something in his chest loosen slightly. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the familiar twinge in his back, and reached for his phone. There had to be other vets in the surrounding towns who could help. The next hour proved frustrating. Each call ended the same way. As soon as he mentioned Brooks Veterinary Services, there were hurried excuses and quick goodbyes. By the fifth rejection, Caleb could feel tension building in his shoulders. Lena's warning echoed in his mind, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on what he could do. His eyes drifted to his workbench, where diagrams and half-finished projects lay scattered. Walking over, he cleared a space and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. His hands moved automatically, sketching rough outlines of support structures and suspension systems. The familiar act of technical drawing calmed him. He found himself adapting motorcycle suspension coil designs, modifying them to accommodate a dog's natural movement. Each sketch brought new ideas, new possibilities. He barely noticed the hours slipping by until his stomach reminded him it was evening. While he heated up leftover soup on the small hot plate he kept in the garage, Caleb watched Axel. The dog had managed to eat and drink from the bowls he'd provided, showing a healthy appetite despite his condition. But any attempt to move his back half resulted in the same frustrated collapse. The garage had grown dim, lit only by the heat lamp and the old fluorescent lights overhead. Caleb sat in silence with his soup, the only sounds being the occasional passing car and the soft whir of the heater he'd set up near Axel's makeshift bed. A soft whine drew his attention. Axel was watching him, those intelligent eyes reflecting the lamplight. Without really thinking about it, Caleb grabbed his old recliner, the one he sometimes slept in when his back was particularly bad, and dragged it closer to where the dog lay. Movement caught his eye, and he glanced out the garage's front windows. Across the street, on the small porch of the Anderson house, sat Elliot, the quiet kid he sometimes saw being wheeled to and from the school bus. The boy was leaning forward in his wheelchair, clearly interested in the unusual activity in the normally quiet garage. Caleb met the boy's curious gaze for a moment before turning back to Axel. The dog had settled, his breathing steady but his eyes still alert. The heat lamp cast a warm glow over them both as darkness settled outside. Despite the recliner being right there, Caleb found himself sliding down to sit on the floor beside Axel. The concrete was hard and cold, making his back protest. But something about leaving the dog alone on the floor felt wrong. He reached out to stroke Axel's fur, and the dog shifted slightly, pressing against his leg. The quiet of the garage wrapped around them like a blanket. Caleb's eyes grew heavy as the day's tension slowly drained from his muscles. Axel's warmth against his side was oddly comforting, and the dog's steady breathing created a peaceful rhythm in the darkness. The last thing Caleb was aware of was Axel's head coming to rest against his thigh. both of them finding some measure of comfort in the simple contact as sleep claimed them. The morning sun crept through the garage windows, casting long rectangles of light across the concrete floor. Caleb stirred from his uncomfortable position against the wall, his back protesting after a night spent on the hard surface. A warm, wet nose nudged his hand insistently, and he opened his eyes to find Axel looking at him expectantly. All right, I'm up," Caleb mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. He watched as Axel attempted to move, the dog's front half pulling forward with surprising strength, while his back half dragged uselessly behind him. The sight sparked something in Caleb's memory. "Hold on a minute," he said, pushing himself to his feet with a grunt. He made his way to the storage room at the back of the garage, where years of collected parts and abandoned projects gathered dust. After some rummaging, he emerged with an old wheelchair frame, its fabric long since removed and one wheel missing. Caleb set the frame on his workbench and began dismantling it, studying each piece with careful consideration. The aluminum tubing could be repurposed, and the remaining wheels bearings might prove useful. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice the garage door's shadow being broken by a small figure until he heard the soft whir of an electric wheelchair. "You're doing it wrong!" Caleb turned to find Elliot, the boy from across the street, sitting in his wheelchair just inside the garage entrance. The morning sun caught the chair's chrome finish, making it gleam. "Excuse me?" Caleb asked, surprised by both the boy's presence and his directness. Elliot wheeled himself closer, his eyes fixed on the dismantled wheelchair parts. "The weight distribution. If you're trying to make something to help him walk," he nodded toward Axel, "you need to think about balance points. That frame's too heavy on one side." Caleb blinked, taken aback by the technical assessment from someone so young. "You know about this stuff?" "I've been in a chair since I was 8, Elliot said matter-of-factly, though something flickered in his eyes. "Spinal tumor surgery. I know a thing or two about mobility aids." He reached out and picked up one of the frame pieces. "This could work, but you'd need to counterbalance it here and here." He pointed to specific spots with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about such things. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of Axel's nails clicking on the concrete as he dragged himself closer to investigate the newcomer. Caleb cleared his throat and reached for his toolbox. "Well then," he said, pulling out a wrench, "what would you suggest?" The tension eased as they fell into the familiar territory of mechanical problem-solving. Elliot proved to have an impressive understanding of physics and engineering for his age, explaining his ideas with growing enthusiasm. They began gathering materials, springs from an old motorcycle suspension, pipe clamps from Caleb's plumbing supplies, and elastic straps that once secured cargo. "See, if we attach the support here," Elliot demonstrated, holding up a piece of tubing, "it'll distribute the weight more evenly across his spine." His wheelchair allowed him to move easily around the workbench, reaching for tools with practiced precision. Caleb found himself nodding along, impressed by the boy's insights. "Like a suspension bridge," he said, starting to see how the pieces could fit together. They worked steadily through the morning, measuring Axel carefully and making adjustments to their design. The dog remained remarkably patient, allowing them to test different components against his twisted frame without complaint. His tail would wag encouragingly whenever either of them spoke to him. "Okay," Caleb said finally, holding up their completed creation. "Let's give it a try." The brace was crude but functional, a network of support, springs, and straps designed to help Axel's back maintain a more natural position. With gentle movements, they fitted it around the dog's body, adjusting the straps until everything sat properly. Elliot wheeled closer, his face intent with concentration. "Try encouraging him to stand now," he suggested, but slowly. Caleb knelt beside Axel, holding a treat just above his head. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "You can do this." Axel's front legs moved first, pushing against the floor as they had before. But this time, as he tried to rise, the brace provided the support his spine lacked. His back legs trembled with effort, but gradually, shakily, he managed to lift himself into a standing position. "Quick!" Elliot exclaimed. "Get the camera!" Caleb scrambled for the old camcorder he kept in his office, nearly dropping it in his haste to turn it on. Through the viewfinder, he captured Axel's first wobbly moments of standing on all four legs. The dog's tail wagged slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe it himself. A bright sound filled the garage, Elliot's laughter, genuine and unrestrained. The boy's entire face had lit up, his earlier shyness forgotten in the triumph of the moment. Caleb couldn't help but smile in response. "Hey," he said, setting down the camera. "Want a soda? Think we earned it." Elliot nodded, still grinning as he watched Axel take a tentative step forward. Caleb retrieved 2 cans from the small fridge in his office, handing one to Elliot just as a woman's voice called from outside. "Elliot? Honey, where are you?" "Over here, Mom," Elliot called back, and a moment later a tired-looking woman appeared in the garage doorway. She took in the scene with surprise. Her son, the dog in its makeshift brace, the scattered tools and parts across the workbench. "He's been helping me with a project," Caleb explained quickly. "He's got quite a mind for engineering." Elliot's mother's face softened with grateful understanding. "Thank you for letting him help," she said. "It's been a while since I've seen him this excited about something." Caleb watched as Elliot wheeled himself toward his mother, already launching into an explanation of what they'd accomplished. As they made their way back across the street, Axel took another shaky step forward, his new brace creaking slightly, but holding firm. "He might just make it," Caleb said quietly, and turned back to his work. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Caleb pulled his truck into Lena's veterinary clinic. Axel sat quietly in the passenger seat, the makeshift brace gleaming with its combination of polished metal and carefully adjusted straps. Caleb's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he parked, remembering Lena's stern warning from their last visit. Inside, the waiting room was empty. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Lena emerged from the back office. She stopped short at the sight of Axel, her professional demeanor slipping for a moment as she watched the dog move with halting but determined steps. You got him walking?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb nodded, keeping one hand near Axel's harness. "Built him a support system. It's not perfect, but it helps." Lena approached slowly, kneeling to examine the brace. Her fingers traced the ingenious combination of springs and supports, her expression a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. "This is remarkable engineering," she admitted. "Had some help," Caleb said. "Look, I know you told me to stay away, but he deserves proper medical care. Will you at least take some x-rays?" Lena stood, conflict evident in her face. After a long moment, she sighed. "Follow me." The examination room was cool and sterile. Lena helped position Axel on the x-ray table, carefully adjusting the machine above him. Caleb waited behind the protective screen, watching as she took several images from different angles. The room hummed with tension as they waited for the digital images to appear on the mounted screen. When they did, Lena's face drained of color. Caleb stepped closer, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He'd seen enough x-rays of his own back problems to understand basic anatomy, but this was different. Where there should have been a clear line of vertebrae, there was instead a strange void, just tissue and malformed fragments of bone floating in empty space. "That's impossible," he muttered. "How is he even alive?" Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she switched off the display and motioned for Caleb to follow her. They walked down a narrow hallway to her private office. Axel trailing behind them with his distinctive gait. The room was small and neat, dominated by filing cabinets and medical reference books. Lena closed the door behind them and pulled out her keys. She approached one of the cabinets, unlocking it with hands that trembled slightly. From the bottom drawer, she withdrew a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape. The label read, Project HoloPoint, K9 Unit D74, in stark black letters. 7 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort, I worked on a military contract. It was supposed to be about developing more effective service animals, dogs that could handle more extreme conditions, carry heavier loads, survive situations that would kill normal animals. She placed the file on her desk but didn't open it. We were successful in a way. Too successful. We created things that shouldn't have been possible. The spinal modifications were meant to allow for enhanced flexibility and strength, but most of the subjects, she trailed off, swallowing hard. Most of them what? Caleb pressed. They suffered, Lena said simply. The ones that survived birth were usually euthanized within days. The physical abnormalities were too severe, the pain too extreme. We had one litter that showed promise. Their mutations were stable, their pain levels manageable. But then there were complications. Axel had settled at Caleb's feet, his eyes fixed on Lena. She couldn't meet his gaze. The entire litter was marked for termination, she continued. Non-viable, they said. Too unpredictable. Too dangerous to let live. I signed the paperwork myself. She finally looked at Axel. But someone must have saved him, smuggled him out somehow. He's just a dog, Caleb insisted, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. A good dog who needs help. Lena shook her head. To them, he's experimental property. If they find out he survived, they won't care how gentle he is or how much progress he's made. They'll take him back, and they'll want to know who's been helping him. The room fell silent except for the soft whir of the ceiling fan. Caleb looked down at Axel, who had pressed himself against Caleb's leg, as if seeking reassurance. The dog's twisted spine was obvious, even through the brace, but there was nothing monstrous about him, just patience and trust in his warm brown eyes. Lena stood perfectly still for a long moment, her internal struggle visible in the tension of her shoulders. Then, with sudden decisiveness, she picked up the sealed file and held it out to Caleb. If you're keeping him, you'll need to know everything, she said quietly. Caleb took the file, feeling the weight of its contents. Not just paper, but responsibility. Axel rose shakily to his feet, ready to follow wherever Caleb led. They left the clinic together, the file tucked securely under Caleb's arm, Axel hobbling faithfully beside him. The morning sun had risen higher now, burning away the last traces of dawn's shadows. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of Caleb's garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Caleb sat at his workbench, the sealed file from Lena spread out before him. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten as he immersed himself in the disturbing contents of Project HoloPoint. Page after page revealed clinical descriptions of genetic modifications, spinal deformities, and breeding experiments. The photos were worse, documentation of failed attempts and malformed subjects. Caleb's stomach churned as he read through the euthanasia reports, each one marked with cold efficiency. Subject terminated due to non-viability. Axel lay nearby on his cushioned mat, his tail moving in gentle sweeps across the floor whenever Caleb looked his way. Despite everything detailed in these reports, the pain thresholds, the physical impossibilities, the warnings about aggressive tendencies, here was Axel, defying it all with his quiet presence and gentle nature. The sound of wheels on concrete drew Caleb's attention to the garage entrance. Elliot was there earlier than usual, clutching a well-worn sketch pad to his chest. The boy had dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd stayed up late working on something. "Morning," Elliot said, wheeling himself inside. "I couldn't sleep, so I made some drawings." He glanced at the scattered papers on Caleb's workbench. "What's all that?" Caleb quickly gathered the disturbing documents, sliding them back into the manila envelope. "Just some old paperwork," he said, not ready to share the full truth. "Show me what you've got." Elliot's face lit up as he opened his sketch pad. The pages were filled with detailed technical drawings, mobility aids reimagined with precision that surprised even Caleb. The boy had clearly spent hours studying mechanics and anatomy, translating his own experiences with mobility challenges into innovative designs. "See, the current brace is good," Elliot explained, pointing to his drawings, "but the suspension system could be better. If we add these flexible joints here and here, it would give Axel more natural movement." Caleb pulled out his own rough sketches, spreading them next to Elliot's. "I was thinking something similar," he said, tracing a line with his finger. "The current support structure is too rigid. He needs more give in the middle section." They laid out their tools and materials, falling into an easy rhythm of collaboration. Elliot's theoretical knowledge complemented Caleb's practical experience perfectly. As they worked, Axel watched them with interest, occasionally coming over to inspect their progress. The morning wore on, and as they fitted pieces together, Caleb found himself talking more than usual. "You know," he said, adjusting a spring mechanism, "I used to work on bigger projects than this. Was a mechanical engineer for 15 years. Elliot looked up from the measurement he was taking. "What happened?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the metal framework. "Made a mistake," he finally said. "Was working on a renovation project, old factory building. Missed some structural problems during the inspection. When the support beam gave way." He absently rubbed his lower back, where the pain was always worst in the mornings. "Was anyone else hurt?" Elliot asked softly. "Number just me?" But that was enough. Caleb picked up a wrench, needing something to occupy his hands. "Should have seen it coming. Should have done better checks. After that, couldn't trust myself with big projects anymore." Elliot was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the wheels of his chair. "You know what's funny?" he said finally. "When I first got sick, all I could think about was running again. Used to dream about it every night. Racing through the park, climbing trees, all that stuff." He looked down at his chair, then over at his technical drawings. "But then I realized something. Wheels are actually pretty amazing. They can take you anywhere if you figure out how to use them right. And they never get tired." He smiled slightly. "Sometimes what seems broken just needs a different way of working." The wisdom in those words hung in the air between them as they returned to their work. By late afternoon, they had completed the new brace. It was lighter than the first version, with a more sophisticated suspension system that would allow Axel's spine to flex naturally while maintaining support. The sun was setting when they took Axel out to the alley behind the garage for testing. The narrow space was quiet, bordered by brick walls and scattered with puddles from recent rain. Caleb carefully fitted the new brace around Axel's twisted frame, while Elliot made final adjustments to the straps. "Okay, boy," Caleb said softly. "Let's see what you can do." Axel stood carefully, testing his balance. The new brace moved with him instead of fighting against him. His first steps were tentative, but as he gained confidence, his movement became more natural. Though still wobbly, there was determination in every step. "He's doing it!" Elliot exclaimed, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Look at him go!" Caleb couldn't help but smile, as Axel made his way down the alley, each step stronger than the last. The dog's tail was held high now, and despite his twisted spine, there was dignity in his movement. Neither of them noticed the woman across the street standing in the shadows of a building. Clara Mendez raised her camera, focusing on the unusual scene. A man and boy in a wheelchair, cheering on a dog with a sophisticated mechanical brace. The camera's shutter clicked softly as she captured the moment, her journalist's instincts telling her there was more to this story than met the eye. The morning sun cast long shadows through the garage's open door as Clara Mendez approached, her notebook tucked under one arm and her camera hanging from her neck. She watched Caleb for a moment as he worked under the hood of an old Chevy, his movements precise despite his obvious stiffness. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice warm and professional. "Are you Caleb?" "I'm Clara Mendez, freelance journalist." Caleb straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a shop rag. His expression was guarded, but polite. "Can I help you?" "I'm working on a piece about small-town innovation," Clara explained, gesturing around the garage. "Local mechanics turning their shops into engineering spaces. I saw some interesting work happening here yesterday." Before Caleb could respond, a familiar whine came from the back of the garage. Axel emerged from behind a workbench, his modified brace gleaming in the morning light. Clara's eyes widened with interest, but Caleb stepped slightly in front of the dog. "That's quite a piece of equipment," Clara said, pointing to Axel's brace. "Did you design that yourself?" "It's nothing special," Caleb replied, his voice tight. "Just helping out a stray." The sound of wheels on concrete interrupted them as Elliot rolled into the garage, his backpack full of new sketches. "Morning, Caleb." "I had some ideas about adjusting the tension on Axel's spine support." He stopped short when he noticed Clara. Clara turned to Elliot with a friendly smile. "Hello there. Are you helping with this project too?" "Yeah." Elliot's face lit up, eager to share. "Axel has this weird spine problem, but we figured out how to help him walk better. Want to see my designs?" Caleb's jaw tightened at Elliot's words, but Clara was already pulling up a chair beside the boy's wheelchair. "I'd love to," she said, taking out her recorder. "Do you mind if I record our conversation? It helps me keep my notes accurate." For the next hour, Clara watched and listened as Elliot enthusiastically explained their work. The boy's technical knowledge impressed her, and she couldn't help but notice how Caleb gradually relaxed as Elliot took center stage in the interview. "Can we show her how well Axel walks now?" Elliot asked Caleb. After a moment's hesitation, Caleb nodded. They moved to the alley behind the garage where Axel demonstrated his improving mobility. Clara recorded video on her phone, fascinated by the dog's determined gait and the sophisticated mechanical support system. "The brace design is remarkable," Clara commented, zooming in on the joint mechanisms. "Have you worked with veterinarians to develop this?" "Some," Caleb answered vaguely, but Clara caught the slight tension in his shoulders. After finishing at the garage, Clara drove across town to Lena's veterinary clinic. The waiting room was empty when she entered, and Lena emerged from the back looking tired and wary. "Dr. Brooks, I'm Clara Mendez. I'm writing about innovative approaches to caring for disabled animals in small communities. Could I ask you a few questions?" Lena's expression cooled noticeably. "I'm quite busy today. Perhaps another time." "It won't take long," Clara pressed. "I'm particularly interested in that German Shepherd with the spinal condition, Axel. The mechanical brace they've developed is fascinating." "I don't discuss specific patients," Lena replied sharply. "And I'm not interested in being interviewed about any aspect of my practice." She moved toward the door, clearly indicating the conversation was over. "Of course, Doctor. But surely you could tell me where the dog came from? For background?" Lena's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the door handle. I don't know anything about that. Good day, Ms. Mendez. Later that night, Clara sat in her small rental apartment reviewing her day's work. She played back the audio recordings, paying special attention to Lena's response about Axel's origin. The veterinarian's stammer stood out sharply against her otherwise professional demeanor. Clara opened her laptop and navigated to her blog's draft folder. She uploaded the video of Axel walking, his strange gait somehow graceful, despite his obvious deformity. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed the caption, "The dog that shouldn't be walking." She stared at the screen, the cursor blinking beside the unpublished post. Something bigger was happening here, something beyond a simple story about small-town innovation. Clara could feel it in Caleb's protective stance, in Elliot's innocent revelations, and especially in Lena's nervous reaction. She left the post in drafts, but her mind was already spinning with possibilities. Tomorrow she would dig deeper. The story was too good to ignore. The morning light filtered through the dusty garage windows as Caleb knelt beside Axel, examining the dog's leg where the brace met his skin. A raw pink spot had formed overnight, and Axel kept trying to lick it despite Caleb's gentle attempts to stop him. "Hey buddy, let me see that," Caleb murmured, carefully lifting Axel's leg. The dog whined softly, but trusted Caleb's touch. The irritation wasn't severe, but it clearly bothered Axel, and Caleb felt a familiar surge of protectiveness. The sound of wheels on concrete announced Elliot's arrival. The boy rolled into the garage, his backpack stuffed with what looked like chunks of foam padding. "Morning," Elliot called out, wheeling closer to inspect Axel's leg. "Oh man, that doesn't look comfortable. I thought this might happen. The same thing used to happen with my first chair." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You brought something?" "Yeah." Elliot unzipped his backpack and pulled out several pieces of high-density foam. "This is from my old racing wheelchair. Mom was going to throw it out, but I kept it. It's really good stuff, designed to prevent pressure sores and everything." Caleb took a piece of foam, running his fingers over its firm but cushiony surface. "This could work," he said, already mentally calculating how to modify the brace's contact points. They spent the next hour carefully cutting and shaping the foam, with Elliot directing the placement based on his own experience with mobility aids. Axel lay patiently nearby, occasionally thumping his tail when either of them looked his way. The sharp ring of Caleb's phone cut through their concentrated work. He almost ignored it. Hardly anyone called him these days. But something made him reach for it. The number wasn't saved in his contacts, but it looked vaguely familiar. "Hello? Dad?" Caleb's hand tightened on the phone. He hadn't heard that voice in over 5 years, but he'd know it anywhere. "Lila?" There was a pause, filled with 5 years of silence and unspoken words. I saw a video online of a dog in your garage." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What video?" "It's on some journalist's blog. Clara Mendez? The dog with the spine problem and the brace you built?" Lila's voice wavered slightly. "Is that really you?" Caleb looked at Axel, his mind racing. How had a video gotten online? He remembered Clara recording yesterday but thought it was just for her notes. "Yeah, that's me." "I'm in town," Lila said quickly, as if she might lose her nerve. "At Mom's. I just started pre-med at State and Could I come by? To see the dog?" Caleb's throat felt tight. "Sure," he managed. "Yeah, you can come by." After hanging up, Caleb explained to Elliot who had called. The boy's eyes widened. He'd never heard Caleb mention a daughter before. "Should I go?" Elliot asked, already reaching for his backpack. "No," Caleb said quickly. "Stay, please." They worked in silence for another 20 minutes before the rumble of a car engine announced a visitor. Caleb looked up to see a small blue Honda parking outside. His daughter stepped out, looking both familiar and strange. Taller than he remembered, her hair shorter, wearing medical scrubs under her jacket. Lila stood in the garage doorway, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. She looked around, taking in the familiar tools and smell of oil, the new addition of dog supplies in the corner, and finally Axel. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "Hi, Lila." Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans, unsure whether to move closer or stay where he was. Elliot broke the tension by rolling forward. "Hi, I'm Elliot. Want to meet Axel?" Lila smiled gratefully at the boy. "Yeah, I'd like that." Axel solved the awkwardness by padding over to Lila himself, his modified brace clicking slightly on the concrete floor. He sniffed her hand and immediately leaned against her leg, looking up with his gentle eyes. "Oh," Lila breathed, kneeling to pet him. "He's so sweet. And this brace, it's amazing." She ran her fingers along the mechanical joints, examining them with newfound medical student interest. "You designed this?" "Elliot helped," Caleb said. "He knows a lot about adaptive equipment." Lila watched as Axel moved around the garage, his gait strange but determined. She kept glancing at her father when she thought he wasn't looking, noting how he anticipated Axel's needs, adjusting the brace straps with careful hands she remembered from childhood, hands that used to fix her bike chain and check under her bed for monsters. "He's different from what I expected," she said after a while. "The dog, I mean. From the video, I thought he'd be more damaged, but he's just—" She trailed off, watching Axel playfully nudge Elliot's wheelchair. "He's just Axel," Caleb finished quietly. They spent another hour in the garage with Elliot enthusiastically explaining their latest modifications to the brace. Lila asked technical questions about joint mobility and weight distribution, her medical training already showing. The conversation felt easier with Elliot there, bridging the gap between father and daughter with his straightforward enthusiasm. Finally, Lila checked her watch and stood up. "I should go. Mom's expecting me for dinner." She hesitated, then stepped forward and gave Caleb a quick, stiff hug. "You're good with broken things, huh?" she said, her tone caught between joking and curious. Caleb couldn't find the words to respond. As Lila turned to leave, she pulled something from her jacket pocket and placed it on the workbench, a photograph worn at the edges. In it, a younger Caleb stood next to a small girl with pigtails, both of them grinning as they held up a trophy from a soapbox derby. After Lila's car disappeared down the street, Caleb picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a long moment, then walked to the wall near his tool chest. With careful movements, he found a thumbtack and pressed the picture into place, where the morning sun would catch it each day. Clara sat in her dimly lit apartment, staring at her laptop screen. The soft glow illuminated her troubled expression as she held a small vial of blood between her fingers. She'd collected it earlier from a bandage Axel had shed, carefully preserving it in a sterile container. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed an email to Dr. Marcus, her contact at the university's genetics lab. "Need urgent analysis, confidential. Possible match to archive military profiles, Project Hollowpoint." She attached the scanned documents from her research and hit send. The blood sample would go out by courier in the morning. Sleep eluded her that night. She paced her small living room, second-guessing herself. The story could make her career, a living specimen from a classified military program hidden in plain sight. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elliot's face lighting up as he worked on Axel's brace, and Caleb's quiet dedication to the dog's care. The next morning, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Dr. Marcus. Clara's heart raced as she opened the file. The genetic markers were unmistakable. Axel's DNA matched the archived Project Hollowpoint profiles perfectly. Multiple gene sequences showed clear signs of manipulation, confirming the dog's engineered origins. Clara drove to Caleb's garage with a heavy heart, clutching a folder containing the test results. The familiar sound of tools and Elliot's cheerful voice drifted through the open door. Axel lay near his usual spot by the heater, his tail wagging as she entered. "Back for more pictures?" Caleb asked without looking up from his work. Clara took a deep breath. "Number, I need to tell you something." She glanced at Elliot, who had stopped adjusting Axel's brace to listen. "Maybe we should talk privately." "Whatever you've got to say, you can say it here," Caleb replied, finally meeting her eyes. Something in her expression made him straighten up. "I ran a test," Clara said quietly, opening the folder. "On Axel's blood. I found it on a discarded bandage." She watched Caleb's face darken. "The results came back this morning. His DNA matches profiles from Project Hollowpoint, a military bioengineering program that was officially terminated years ago." The wrench in Caleb's hand clattered to the floor. "You did what?" "I had to confirm the story," Clara continued, her words coming faster now. "The genetic markers are clear. Axel was part of an experimental breeding program." "Get out!" Caleb's voice was low and dangerous. "Please, just look at the results. The public has a right to know." "The public?" Caleb stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You went behind our backs, stole his blood, and now you're talking about the public. He's not your story. He's not your property to expose." "Mr. Walker, I understand you're upset." "No, you don't understand anything," Caleb cut her off. "You see a headline. I see a living creature who trusts us, who's fighting to walk despite everything that's been done to him. Get off my property. Now." Clara glanced at Elliot, hoping for support, but the boy had gone very still in his wheelchair. His hands gripped the arms tightly, knuckles white. "They'll take him away, won't they?" Elliot's voice was barely above a whisper. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth hung heavy in the air. They all knew what happened to classified military assets, especially ones that weren't supposed to exist. "I said get out," Caleb repeated, moving to stand between Clara and Axel. She backed toward the door, leaving the folder of test results on a workbench. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I really am." The garage door slammed behind her with a finality that made her flinch. As she walked to her car, she noticed Axel watching through the window, his head tilted in that curious way of his. For the first time since starting her investigation, Clara felt sick to her stomach. The sun had set by the time a black SUV pulled up 2 blocks from Caleb's garage. Its tinted windows reflected the streetlights as it idled quietly in the growing darkness. Inside, a man in a dark suit held a burner phone to his ear. "Target confirmed," he spoke in clipped tones. "Dogs active. Secure before exposure widens." The phone clicked shut with a snap, and the SUV door opened silently into the night. The last rays of daylight disappeared behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the empty street. In Caleb's garage, Axel's brace clicked softly against the concrete as he moved closer to Elliot, sensing the boy's distress. Neither of them knew about the vehicle lurking in the darkness, or the men who would soon come to claim what they considered their property. The morning sun cast long shadows across Caleb's garage as he lifted the shutters, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes immediately found the black SUV still parked down the street, its tinted windows reflecting the early light. He'd seen it there yesterday, and its continued presence made his skin crawl. Axel padded around the garage, his new brace clicking softly against the concrete floor. The improved padding Elliot had suggested made a noticeable difference. The dog moved with more confidence now, his gait smoother than before. The raw spots on his legs were healing nicely, though Caleb still checked them each morning for signs of irritation. The familiar squeak of wheelchair wheels announced Elliot's arrival. The boy rolled into the garage earlier than usual, but something was off. His usual enthusiasm seemed muted, his shoulders slightly hunched. He gave Axel a quiet pat as he passed, but didn't launch into his usual excited chatter about potential brace improvements. "You're here early," Caleb said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He watched as Elliot positioned himself near his usual workbench, noting how the boy's eyes kept drifting to where Clara had stood yesterday. "Couldn't sleep," Elliot mumbled, pulling out his sketch pad but not opening it. His fingers traced the spiral binding absently. Caleb understood. Clara's revelation about Axel's origins had shaken them all, but it seemed to have hit Elliot particularly hard. The boy who usually bubbled over with ideas and questions now sat in unusual silence, lost in his own thoughts. "Want to help me adjust the lateral supports on the brace?" Caleb offered, trying to draw him out. Elliot nodded but didn't move immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What if they come for him?" The question hung in the air, heavy with all the fear and uncertainty they'd been avoiding since yesterday. Caleb watched as Axel limped over to Elliot, resting his head on the boy's knee as if sensing his distress. "Let's focus on what we can control," Caleb said finally, though the words felt hollow, even to him. He glanced again at the SUV through the garage windows, its presence a constant reminder of their precarious situation. After Elliot became absorbed in his work, Caleb retrieved the hollow point file from his desk. The manila folder felt heavy in his hands, weighted with secrets that could either protect or condemn Axel. His first instinct was to destroy it, shred the papers, burn the evidence, eliminate any trace of Axel's connection to the military program. But something stopped him. These documents might be their only proof that Axel existed officially, their only leverage if things went wrong. After a moment's hesitation, he walked to the back of the garage where a rusted toolbox sat gathering dust. The lock still worked, though the key had been lost years ago. Caleb carefully placed the file inside and secured it with a new combination lock. By mid-morning, his concern about the SUV had grown too strong to ignore. He called Lena's clinic, keeping his voice low as Elliot worked with Axel nearby. "The same vehicle?" Lena asked, her usual professional tone cracking slightly. "Black SUV, government plates?" "Can't see the plates from here, but yeah. Been there since yesterday." There was a long pause on the line. When Lena spoke again, her voice was tight with tension. "If they're already surveilling you, they'll move fast. They don't like loose ends, especially ones that could expose classified projects." "What are our options?" "Limited." He heard papers shuffling in the background. "I'm sending over an unregistered medical exemption form for Axel. It probably won't stop them if they're determined, but it might buy us some time." "How much time?" "Not enough." Lena's voice dropped lower. "Caleb, these people, they don't care about rehabilitation or progress. They see Axel as government property, a failed experiment that needs to be contained. The fact that he's alive at all is a security breach in their eyes." The words sent a chill down Caleb's spine. He watched as Axel demonstrated his improved walking ability for Elliot, the dog's tail wagging gently as the boy praised him. "The exemption form will be there within the hour," Lena continued. "Keep it with you at all times. And Caleb, be careful. These people don't always operate within official channels." The day passed with agonizing slowness. Caleb kept Axel close, refusing even routine maintenance jobs that would take him away from the garage. When evening came, he broke his usual routine and closed up early, securing all the doors and windows before darkness fell completely. For the first time, he let Axel sleep inside the garage instead of in his usual spot behind the building. The dog seemed to sense the tension, staying close to Caleb's leg as he made one final check of the premises. The night settled in, bringing with it an unsettling silence. Caleb sat in his old recliner, unable to sleep, watching shadows move across the walls. Around midnight, a sound caught his attention. Faint metallic clicks coming from outside, too rhythmic and deliberate to be random noise. Moving carefully to avoid making noise, Caleb approached the window. His heart nearly stopped as he spotted two figures moving along the garage perimeter. They wore dark clothing and moved with practiced efficiency, scanning the building with what looked like handheld devices. The soft blue glow from the equipment cast eerie shadows on their faces. Caleb's hand found a heavy wrench on the nearby workbench. He gripped it tightly, feeling the cold metal against his palm as he reached for the light switch. With one smooth motion, he plunged the garage into darkness, his eyes never leaving the shadows moving outside. The first hints of dawn had barely touched the horizon when the quiet morning exploded into chaos. Red and blue lights suddenly flooded Caleb's garage, casting harsh shadows through the windows. The screech of tires on pavement shattered the pre-dawn silence as three black SUVs and a large van surrounded the building. Men and women in dark uniforms poured out of the vehicles, their jackets emblazoned with Federal Animal Research Compliance in bold white letters. They moved with practiced efficiency, taking up positions around every exit. Their boots crunched on the gravel as they approached the main garage door. Inside, Caleb had just finished feeding Axel his morning kibble when the lights began flashing. The dog's ears perked up, his body tensing as he sensed the change in atmosphere. Caleb's hand instinctively went to Axel's head, steadying him, or saw a sharp knock rattled the door. "Federal agents, open up!" Caleb's heart hammered in his chest as he moved toward the entrance. He opened it to find a stern-faced woman in a dark suit holding up a badge and official documentation. "Mr. Roberts, I'm Agent Sarah. We have a federal seizure warrant for the experimental animal designated K9 Unit D74. She thrust the papers at him. "The warrant cites immediate biohazard concerns and violation of classified research protocols." Caleb's eyes scanned the document, but the words blurred together. "This is ridiculous. He's just a dog. He's not dangerous. Step aside, sir." Agent Sarah's voice left no room for argument. Two handlers in protective gear pushed past him, heading straight for Axel. "No!" Caleb moved to block their path. "You can't take him. He needs special care. The brace dash." One of the handlers reached for Axel, who backed away, confused and frightened. The dog's new brace clicked against the concrete floor as he tried to maintain his balance. Caleb lunged forward, shoving the first handler back. "Leave him alone!" His protective instinct took over as he positioned himself between Axel and the team. "Restrain him!" Agent Sarah ordered sharply. Two more agents grabbed Caleb's arms, wrestling him back despite his struggles. His bad back screamed in protest as they forced him against the wall. He watched helplessly as the handlers approached Axel again, this time with a steel muzzle and heavy-duty restraints. "Please," Caleb's voice cracked. "He can't walk without the brace. You'll hurt him." Aqua whined, a high-pitched sound of distress that cut through Caleb like a knife. The dog tried to move toward him but stumbled as one of the handlers grabbed his collar. They forced the muzzle over his snout while he trembled, his eyes locked on Caleb's face. Across the street, Elliot sat in his wheelchair on his front porch, having heard the commotion. His hands gripped his armrests so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He wanted to move, to help somehow, but his body wouldn't respond. He could only watch as the scene unfolded like a nightmare. The handlers lifted Axel, who struggled weakly in their grip. His back end sagged without proper support, and Caleb felt sick watching them carry him so carelessly. They moved toward the van, which had been lined with steel kennels. The screech of tires announced Lena's arrival. She jumped out of her truck, medical bag in hand, running toward the scene. "Stop! I'm his attending veterinarian. You can't transport him without proper medical." "Dr. Brooks." Agent Sarah turned to face her. "You're in no position to make demands. You're under investigation for breaching containment regulations related to Project Hollow Point. Step back, or we'll add interference with a federal operation to the charges." Lena's face paled, but she stood her ground. "At least let me ensure he's properly supported for transport. His spine—" "This is a classified military asset, Doctor. Your services are no longer required." The agent's words were clipped and final. The agents released Caleb, who sagged against the wall, watching helplessly as they loaded Axel into the van. The dog's eyes, visible through the kennel bars, never left his face. Yellow crime scene tape appeared, stretched across the garage entrance by efficient hands. "This facility is now under federal quarantine pending investigation," Agent Sarah announced. "Anyone attempting to enter will be arrested." The neighborhood had begun to wake up, faces appearing in windows and on porches. They watched in stunned silence as the federal team methodically documented and sealed off Caleb's garage. Photos were taken, samples collected, equipment cataloged. The morning sun now fully illuminated the scene, making it feel surreal in its clarity. Elliot finally found the strength to wheel himself back inside his house, tears streaming down his face. His mother tried to coax him to eat breakfast, but he pushed past her and locked himself in his room. The sound of his fist hitting his pillow echoed through the quiet house. Hours passed. The federal teams eventually departed, leaving behind only the yellow tape and a posted guard. The neighborhood slowly returned to its routine, though the morning's events had left an uneasy pall over everything. As evening approached, Caleb sat on the steps of his sealed garage, his body aching from the morning's struggle. The empty brace lay where it had fallen during the chaos, its carefully crafted joints and padding now useless. He stared at it until his vision blurred, remembering how proud Elliot had been when they'd finally got the design right. Miles away, in a sterile facility on the outskirts of town, Axel lay motionless in a steel kennel. The space was barely large enough for him to turn around, and without his brace, he could only lie on his side. His tail, which had always maintained at least a gentle wag even in difficult times, now lay still against the cold metal floor. His eyes, usually bright and engaged, had taken on a dull, distant look. Above his kennel, a surveillance camera tracked every movement, its red light blinking steadily in the darkness. The mechanical eye watched impassively as Axel closed his eyes, too exhausted and confused to even whimper. Elliot barely slept that night. His mind kept replaying the terrible scene from the morning, the flashing lights, Caleb being pushed against the wall, and worst of all, Axel's frightened eyes as they carried him away. Around 4 a.m, he sat up in bed, his hands shaking, but his mind suddenly clear. He reached for his tablet, fingers moving quickly across the screen. Over the past weeks, he'd taken dozens of videos of Axel. First attempts with the brace, successful walks in the alley, quiet moments in the garage. There was even footage from his mom's phone of the day Axel had prevented him from rolling into traffic when his wheelchair brake failed. The editing app opened with a familiar chime. Elliot's face was set with determination as he began piecing the clips together. The first segment showed Axel as they'd found him, wet, scared, and unable to stand. Then came the early attempts with the makeshift brace, Axel's tail wagging despite the struggle. He added clips of Caleb gently adjusting the supports, speaking softly to the dog while testing each new modification. "This is Axel," Elliot recorded in a voiceover, his young voice steady despite his nerves. They say he's dangerous because he's different. But being different isn't the same as being dangerous. He included footage of Axel playing with neighborhood kids, always gentle despite his size. There were clips of the dog sleeping peacefully in the garage, sharing Caleb's lunch breaks, watching curiously as Elliot worked on homework between brace adjustments. Axel wasn't supposed to walk, Elliot continued, adding background music that his sister had used in her school projects. But he never gave up. Mr. Roberts, Caleb, he didn't give up either. They said Axel was just an experiment. But he's more than that. He's our friend. The most powerful clip came next, the day Axel had saved him. The footage, caught on a neighbor's security camera, showed Elliot's wheelchair rolling toward the street when the brake failed. Axel, despite his awkward gait, had moved quickly to block the chair's path, using his body to stop it before it reached the curb. He's not a threat. Elliot's voice grew more passionate. He's a miracle, and miracles shouldn't be locked in cages. The final edit took hours. The sun was rising by the time Elliot added the last touches: contact information for local representatives, links to animal rights organizations, and a simple plea: help us bring Axel home. At exactly noon, with hands trembling slightly, Elliot hit upload. The video went live on every social media platform he could access. He shared it in local community groups first, then broader pet lover forums, and finally, disability advocacy pages. The response was immediate. Within the first hour, the video had been shared over 100 times. By 2 o'clock, that number had tripled. Comments poured in from around the country. This is heartbreaking. Let Axel live. How can they call this dog dangerous? Contact your representatives now. Caleb, who had been sitting in his truck staring at the sealed garage, felt his phone buzz repeatedly with notifications. When he finally checked it, he saw Elliot's video. His throat tightened as he watched their weeks with Axel condensed into 5 powerful minutes. Without hesitation, he called Lila. She answered on the first ring. She'd already seen the video. That kid, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion, that boy has more fight in him than most grown men. Yeah, I'm coming down, Lila replied immediately. I'll leave right now. We'll figure this out, Dad. Lila, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice softened. You taught me that we fix what's broken, remember? Even if it takes a while to figure out how. Across town, Clara Mendez sat in her apartment, watching her social media feeds explode with Elliot's video. The guilt that had been gnawing at her since yesterday turned into resolve. She opened her contacts list and started making calls. Jim? It's Clara. Remember that favor you owe me? I need this video on your network's morning show. Yes, it's that important. She worked through her media contacts methodically, pushing Elliot's video to national outlets. Her fingers flew across her keyboard as she crafted press releases and background information packets. She included quotes from veterinary experts about Axel's condition, emphasizing the dog's gentle nature and the innovative community solution that had given him mobility. By late afternoon, Lena arrived at the local news station. She'd seen the video and made her decision. The camera rolled as she spoke directly into the lens, her professional demeanor masking her nervousness. As Axel's veterinarian, I can state unequivocally that he poses no threat to public safety, she declared. What's more, as a former military researcher, I can testify that the Project Hollow Point protocols were designed to create weapons, but Axel defied those expectations. He chose gentleness. He chose connection. He chose life. The hashtag number Let Axel Live began trending nationally by evening. Animal rights activists coordinated with disability advocates to organize protests. People began gathering outside the facility where Axel was being held, carrying signs with his picture and chanting for his release. The crowd grew as the sun set. First dozens, then hundreds of people. They carried candles and photos printed from Elliot's video. Some brought their own dogs wearing signs that read, "I stand with Axel," and "Different, not dangerous." Parents lifted children on their shoulders to see over the facility's high fence. Local news vans arrived to cover the growing protest. Reporters interviewed participants, their cameras capturing the diverse crowd. Veterans in wheelchairs, families with therapy dogs, animal rescue workers, and ordinary citizens moved by Elliot's video. Among the protesters, a group of engineering students from the local college had brought a replica of Axel's brace, explaining to reporters how the design represented innovation born from compassion. Medical professionals spoke about the importance of allowing Axel to continue his therapy with the people who understood his unique needs. The facility's security lights cast harsh shadows across the gathered crowd, but no one moved to disperse. They stood firm, their voices rising in unified purpose, demanding the return of one unique dog who had touched so many lives. Inside the facility, Axel lay in his kennel, unaware of the movement he had inspired. The surveillance camera continued its mechanical vigil, recording as the sound of hundreds of voices calling his name drifted through the building's thick walls. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cool. Caleb stood in front of his bathroom mirror, fumbling with buttons he hadn't touched in years. His hands shook slightly as he pulled a faded blue-collared shirt from the back of his closet, the fabric stiff from disuse. He ran an iron over it carefully, remembering how his wife used to do this for him before everything fell apart. The shirt still bore traces of motor oil near the cuff, but it was the cleanest one he owned. His jeans, though worn, had been washed twice to remove the garage grime. He'd even polished his work boots, though the steel toes still showed through the leather. Outside the courthouse, people gathered early. Signs and banners waved in the morning breeze. "Justice for Axel," and "Different, not dangerous," written in bold letters. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Lila waited on the courthouse steps, wearing a neat blazer over dark jeans. Her hair was pulled back professionally, making her look older than her 18 years. When she saw Caleb approaching, her eyes widened slightly. She'd never seen her father in anything but work clothes. "You clean up, okay?" she said softly, reaching for his hand. Her fingers were warm against his calloused palm. For a moment, they both remembered countless smaller hands held on other steps, before distance and silence had grown between them. Together, they climbed toward the heavy wooden doors. Reporters called out questions, cameras flashing, but Caleb kept his eyes forward. Inside, the courthouse hallway hummed with whispered conversations and shuffling feet. The hearing room was already packed when they entered. Elliot sat in the front row with his mother, his tablet loaded with presentation materials. His wheelchair had been polished too, chrome parts gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Clara Mendez occupied a corner seat, her press badge visible, but her notebook closed. She was here as a witness, not a reporter. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff called for order. Judge Marion entered, her robes rustling as she took her seat. Her eyes swept the crowded room before landing on the thick file before her. "This hearing," she began, "will determine the disposition of the animal known as Axel, currently held under federal custody. We will hear testimony regarding his origin, condition, and potential risk factors." She nodded to the first witness. "Dr. Brooks, please take the stand." Lena approached steadily, though her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore her white coat like armor, her veterinary credentials displayed prominently. After being sworn in, she began her testimony. "I first encountered Axel when Mr. Roberts brought him to my clinic," she stated clearly. "Initial examination revealed severe spinal abnormalities consistent with genetic modification under Project Hollow Point. a military program I worked with from 2015 to 2017. She explained the project's goals to create enhanced service animals and its eventual termination due to ethical concerns. Axel's litter was deemed non-viable due to severe developmental issues. Standard protocol required euthanasia. The judge leaned forward. Yet this dog survived. In your professional opinion, does he pose any danger? Lena's voice grew stronger. No, Your Honor. In fact, he represents something extraordinary. An accident of science that produced not a weapon, but a testament to adaptation and resilience. His genetic modifications failed to produce the aggressive traits the program sought. Instead, they created a being of remarkable gentleness and intelligence. She described Axel's interactions with children, his careful movements despite his disability, his protective instincts toward Elliot. He's not a failed experiment, she concluded. He's a successful evolution beyond the program's limited vision. Next, Elliot wheeled himself to the designated space. His tablet connected to the courtroom's display system, bringing up his carefully edited presentation. He spoke clearly, despite his nervousness. I know what it's like when people think you're broken, he began, when they see what you can't do instead of what you can. His fingers moved across the screen, bringing up his initial brace designs. But Axel showed me that different isn't wrong. It's just a puzzle waiting to be solved. He played clips of Axel's progress, explaining each modification to the brace design. His technical knowledge impressed the court, terms like weight distribution and spinal support, flowing naturally from his young voice. He showed how each failure led to improvements, how Axel's patience never wavered during adjustments. Some people think being broken means giving up, Elliot said, his voice growing stronger. Axel proved them wrong. He taught me that too. When Caleb's name was called, he rose slowly. His back twinged as he walked to the stand, the old injury making itself known as it always did under stress. He placed his hand on the Bible, spoke his oath, and faced the crowded room. I found Axel behind my garage, he began, his voice rough but clear. He was wet, scared, but he looked at me like he knew I'd help. Maybe because broken recognizes broken. He described his own accident, the support beam that had crushed him, the months of recovery, the anger that drove away his family. I stopped seeing purpose in anything, he admitted. Figured if I couldn't be fixed, what was the point? But then he spoke about watching Axel struggle to stand despite impossible odds, about Elliot's determination to solve problems others deemed unsolvable, about how teaching a dog to walk had taught him to move forward too. We were both built wrong, Caleb said, his eyes meeting Lila's in the crowd. But we didn't give up. Why should anyone else? The room erupted in spontaneous applause. Judge Marion rapped her gavel for order, but her eyes were thoughtful as she studied Caleb. This court will take a 30-minute recess, she announced, after which I will deliver my decision regarding Axel's disposition. The crowd rose, buzzing with tension and hope. Caleb stepped down from the stand, his legs slightly unsteady. Lila met him halfway, slipping her arm through his as they walked toward the hallway. In the holding facility across town, Axel lay in his kennel, unaware that his fate was being decided. The surveillance camera blinked steadily, recording his quiet breathing as the morning sun cast bars of light through the high windows. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as crowds gathered for the final hearing. What had begun as a small group of local supporters had swelled overnight into hundreds of protesters. They filled the sidewalks and spilled into the street, their signs bobbing like colorful waves against the gray stone building. Built different, still worthy, proclaimed a large banner stretched between two light poles. Axel is not a weapon, read another, held high by a woman in a wheelchair. Dozens more signs dotted the crowd, many bearing the viral hashtag #LetAxel that had sparked nationwide attention. News crews jostled for position, their cameras trained on the courthouse entrance. Social media live streamers broadcast from every angle, their phones capturing the growing energy of the crowd. A group of veterans stood quietly to one side, their service dogs sitting alertly at their feet. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Caleb sat in the front row, his clean shirt already creasing at the elbows from nervous fidgeting. Lila pressed close to his side, her hand resting protectively on his arm. The touch grounded him, reminded him to breathe. Elliot had positioned his wheelchair next to them, his tablet powered down and tucked away. His mother sat behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder. Dark circles under his eyes revealed a sleepless night, but his expression remained determined. Dr. Lena Brooks occupied the seat on Caleb's other side. She'd traded her usual veterinary coat for a conservative blue suit, her credentials still prominently displayed on her lapel. Her fingers twisted a pen repeatedly, the only sign of her anxiety. The gallery filled quickly with supporters, media representatives, and curious onlookers. Clara Mendez slipped in just before the doors closed, choosing a seat near the back. She carried her camera but kept it lowered, her usual journalistic eagerness tempered by the weight of her role in the events. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. The court of the Honorable Judge Marion is now in session." Judge Marion entered, her black robe settling around her as she took her seat. Her expression revealed nothing as she surveyed the packed courtroom. She adjusted her reading glasses and lifted the thick case file. "Be seated," she commanded, waiting for the shuffle of movement to cease. "After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented yesterday, I am prepared to deliver my ruling in the matter of the animal designated as Axel." The room fell so silent that the gentle whir of the air conditioning seemed thunderous. Caleb's fingers gripped the wooden bench beneath him. Lila's hand tightened on his arm. "This case," Judge Marion continued, "presents unique challenges to our legal system. We must balance public safety concerns with ethical considerations regarding the treatment of animals resulting from military research programs. We must also consider the demonstrated therapeutic and social value this particular animal has provided to his community." She paused, removing her glasses to address the room directly. "The government's position that this animal represents potential biohazard risk is not supported by current medical evidence. Dr. Brooks's testimony regarding Axel's genetic modifications clearly indicated that while his physical structure is unique, it poses no threat to public health or safety." A ripple of hopeful murmurs moved through the crowd. The judge raised her hand for silence. "Furthermore, the claim that Axel remains property of the military research program is invalidated by the program's own termination documents, which clearly state that all experimental subjects were to be humanely euthanized. As Axel was not euthanized, but rather survived through unknown means, his status as military property was effectively abandoned." Caleb felt his chest tighten. Elliot leaned forward in his wheelchair, barely breathing. "Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that Axel is not property of the United States government, nor does he constitute a biohazard requiring containment. Instead, he is hereby granted protected status as a medically assisted, non-commercial companion animal." The first sounds of celebration began to build, but Judge Marion wasn't finished. "However," she emphasized, raising her voice slightly, "given his unique medical needs and the public interest in his welfare, Axel must remain under monitored care in a registered facility with proper documentation of his ongoing condition and treatment." Before the words had fully left her mouth, Caleb was on his feet. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rough but clear. "I volunteer my garage as a registered facility. I've already been maintaining records of his care and progress." Judge Marion nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. "Mr. Roberts, given your demonstrated commitment to Axel's welfare and the successful adaptation of your workspace to meet his needs, the court accepts your offer. You will need to file proper registration paperwork and submit to periodic inspections." She lifted her gavel. "Axel will be released to Mr. Roberts' care by end of business today. Court is adjourned." The crack of the gavel was lost in the explosion of cheers and applause. People hugged and cried. Reporters rushed for the doors, already broadcasting the verdict. Elliot whooped and spun his wheelchair in a circle of joy. Lila threw her arms around her father's neck, and for the first time in years, Caleb hugged his daughter back, without hesitation or awkwardness. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, a small group gathered outside the holding facility. Caleb stood with Axel's travel crate ready, his hands steady despite his racing heart. Elliot waited nearby, barely containing his excitement. Lila and Lena stood together, sharing quiet smiles of relief. The facility door opened with a metallic click. 2 handlers emerged, leading Axel on a standard leash. The dog's gait was uneven without his brace, but his eyes were bright and alert. When he saw Caleb, his tail began to tremble. The handlers transferred the leash and paperwork to Caleb without ceremony. As soon as they stepped away, Caleb crouched down to Axel's level, ignoring the protest in his back. "Told you I'd bring you home," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Axel pressed his head against Caleb's chest, his whole body quivering with recognition and relief. Elliot didn't try to hide his tears as he wheeled closer, reaching out to scratch behind Axel's ears. The dog turned to lick his hand, tail wagging stronger now. From a respectful distance, Clara Mendez recorded the reunion on her camera. But this time, her finger didn't hover over the upload button. She simply watched through the viewfinder, capturing the quiet moment of healing and homecoming without any intention to share it. Some moments, she had learned, belong just to those who live them. 2 months passed like a gentle breeze, bringing change as subtle yet profound as autumn turning leaves. The garage that had once echoed with the clang of wrenches on engines now hummed with a different kind of energy. 3 3D printers whirred steadily in the corner, laying down layer after layer of specialized plastic. Metal frames in various stages of completion lined the walls, each one custom designed for a unique need. Tools, many donated by community members touched by Axel's story, filled new organized shelves. Above the rolled-up garage door, a modest sign caught the morning light. Axel Works, mobility for those who need it. The letters were simple, professional, yet somehow warm, just like the space they announced. Inside, the concrete floor had been sealed and painted with non-slip coating, making it easier for both wheels and paws to navigate. Caleb stood at his workbench, now adjusted to accommodate both standing and seated work heights. His hands moved with practiced care as he adjusted the tension on a prototype brace. The back pain that once clouded his features had eased, replaced by the focused concentration of someone who had found his purpose. Elliot sat nearby at his own specially designed workspace, his tablet displaying 3D modeling software. At 12, he'd already become their lead design consultant, his personal experience with mobility challenges giving him insights that no engineering degree could match. His wheelchair, now sporting several custom modifications, allowed him to move smoothly between stations. Dr. Lena Brooks occupied what had once been the office area, transformed into a proper medical consultation space. Her veterinary expertise and military research background proved invaluable in understanding the complex intersections of anatomy and mechanical support. She split her time between her clinic and Axelworks, finding healing and helping others the way she couldn't help Axel's litter mates years ago. A young Labrador with hip dysplasia visited that afternoon with its family, a mother, father, and 2 kids who looked both hopeful and nervous. The lab, named Cookie, struggled to walk across the floor, her back legs splaying awkwardly. Elliot wheeled forward, his voice confident and kind. "Watch this," he said, pulling up a holographic display of their latest brace design. The 3D model rotated slowly, showing the innovative support structure. "We've developed this specifically for hip issues. It works kind of like a gentle hug for the joints." The youngest child, about 7, looked skeptical. But will she still be able to play? As if on cue, Axel appeared from his rest area, moving with smooth grace in his latest generation brace. The refined design was sleeker than the original prototype, with carbon fiber components and breathable padding. He approached Cookie slowly, tail wagging in gentle welcome. "Axel here had it much worse than Cookie," Elliot explained, watching as the 2 dogs sniffed each other. "But look at him now." Caleb nodded to Axel, giving a small hand signal they'd developed. The German Shepherd began walking in a circle, showing off his steady gait. Cookie watched, ears perked with interest. When Axel stopped beside her, she attempted to mimic his movement. "That's actually part of our process," Caleb explained, his voice warmer than it had been in years. "Axel helps other dogs adjust to their braces. They seem to learn better from him than from us." The door chimed and Lila entered, carrying her backpack filled with medical textbooks. She'd arranged her pre-med schedule to help with weekend fittings, finding that the practical experience complemented her studies perfectly. The sight of her walking confidently into her father's workspace still felt like a small miracle to Caleb. "Perfect timing," Caleb said, giving her a quick side hug that would have been impossible months ago. "Could you help me get Cookie's measurements?" Clara Mendez sat at her desk in the small outreach office, reviewing applications for their assistance program. After the trial, she'd approached them with an idea, using her media skills to help other animals and families in need. Now she managed their social media presence and coordinated with other organizations, turning her investigative instincts toward finding those who could benefit from Axelworks services. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Cookie was fitted with her first prototype, her tentative steps growing more confident under Axel's patient guidance. The family left with hope in their eyes and detailed care instructions in their hands. Other visitors came and went, some for adjustments, others for consultations. A few just to see the miracle dog who had started it all. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in warm golds and soft pinks, Caleb closed up the shop. He watched as Elliot secured the 3D printers and powered down his design station. Axel waited by the door, his posture relaxed but alert. "Want to take a walk?" Caleb asked, though it was really more of a tradition than a question by now. Elliot's face lit up. "Race you to the field!" They made their way to the open space behind the shop, a gentle slope of grass that had become their evening refuge. Axel trotted between them, his movements synchronized perfectly with Elliot's wheelchair. His brace caught the setting sun, the carbon fiber gleaming like threads of gold. They didn't hurry. There was no need for speed here, no competition, no pressure to be anything other than what they were. Elliot's wheels left faint trails in the dewy grass. Axel's paws fell in steady rhythm. Caleb's boots crunched softly beside them. The mechanic looked at his companions, the boy who had taught him to see solutions instead of problems, and the dog who had reminded him how to care. They moved together in perfect balance, 3 different gaits finding harmony in their shared journey. A smile spread across Caleb's face, unforced and genuine. In the warm evening light, with the sound of crickets beginning their evening song and the smell of fresh grass rising around them, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. If you enjoyed the story of Caleb and Axel, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.